Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Special flight that will be leaving from Mazar-e-Sharif for India tonight and with us.
Afghanistan is turning into one of those stories that you run out of ways to tell. Going from bad to worse is an apt description, but you can say it only so many times. So we'll tell you smaller stories and you can join the dots. Look at the big picture. India has shut its last operating consulate today, Mazar-e-Sharif. It was central to India's development projects in the country, but the Taliban have now surrounded the city. It made sense to evacuate. 7 provincial capitals of Afghanistan have fallen to the Taliban. Hundreds of civilians, including children, have been killed, thousands displaced. The refugee crisis this is creating is a completely different disaster that the world must brace for. The Americans who began the war want nothing to do with it now. The Pakistanis who fueled this war say they're being wrongly targeted. A hashtag is trending the world over. It says, "Sanction Pakistan." That's the hashtag. What for? For pushing terrorism into Afghanistan, for supporting the Taliban's attacks. It's a valid demand. But the world powers have long proven to be useless when faced with a logical argument. Will this time be different? We'll wait and see. On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss all of this. Also on the show, as the Delta variant of the Wuhan virus spreads in China, cases hit a 7-month high. Beijing punishes officials for poor response. Efficacy of Chinese vaccines comes into question yet again. Canada extends a flight ban from India, but opens borders to the U.S. where cases are soaring. This is the story of pandemic travel, hard borders, high costs, and politics over science. India and Saudi Arabia begin their first naval exercise, a special report on what this means for the Delhi-Riyadh relationship. And Marvel and DC face backlash over poor pay to creators. $5,000 and perhaps a thank you note is what you get for a movie in which they made $1 billion. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Afghan forces claim to have killed 47 Taliban terrorists in an airstrike in central Kandahar. While 25 terrorists were wounded, 2 hideouts were destroyed in the aerial strike. The number of children hospitalized with COVID-19 in the United States has surged exponentially as new COVID-19 cases in the U.S. rebounded to more than 100,000 a day on average, returning to the level of the winter surge seen nearly 6 months ago. This rate is nearly 5 times higher than it was a month ago. Kim Yo-jong, the sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, has said South Korea and the United States will face even greater security threats for going ahead with their scheduled joint military drills. Kim Yo-jong said that the drills are an unwelcome self-destructive action that threaten the North Korean people and raise tensions on the Korean peninsula. Britain's Prince Andrew has been sued in a New York court by a woman who alleges that he sexually assaulted her when she was 17 years old. A Chinese court has upheld the death sentence for a Canadian citizen convicted over drug smuggling charges. Robert Lloyd Schellenberg was given the death penalty in 2019 after an original sentence of 15 years in prison was deemed too lenient. Bangladesh's government and aid agencies have started vaccinating Rohingya refugees against COVID-19 as the highly transmissible Delta variant causes an infection surge across the country. Around 20,000 infections and 200 deaths have been recorded so far in Cox's Bazar district, where the refugees are based. Hundreds of protesters gathered outside the Athens parliament, demonstrating against the government's handling of the wildfires that have destroyed forests and properties across the country. 10 people have lost their lives and many have suffered injuries, as firefighters and volunteers struggle to contain the blazes. London's famous Tower Bridge got stuck in its open position for the second time in a year due to a technical fault, leading to traffic snarls over River Thames. Six-time World Footballer of the Year Lionel Messi has agreed to a 2-year deal with French giants Paris Saint-Germain. Messi and his family flew out of Barcelona with his wife Antonella, posting on social media that a new adventure awaited them. Messi joined Barcelona as a 13-year-old in 2000, but a new contract would not be agreed due to the club's spiraling debt. Messi scored 682 goals for Barcelona and is expected to lead PSG's push for a first-ever Champions League title. The International Cricket Council is pushing to make cricket a part of the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. ICC Chairman Greg Barclay confirmed that the sport's long-term future was linked to the Olympics. The ICC has been keen to include T20 cricket at the Games, and a women's T20 tournament will be played at the 2022 Commonwealth Games in Birmingham.
We begin tonight with Afghanistan. The situation is alarming. Yesterday, we called it a train wreck in slow motion. Tonight, we'll show you how it's unfolding. The Taliban now controls 7 provincial capitals in Afghanistan, 230 districts. It is carrying out violent attacks. More than 1,000 civilians have been killed in the last month alone, a direct result of the Taliban's offensive. More than 240,000 Afghans have been displaced internally since the month of May. And in the last 3 days alone, at least 27 children have died. The Taliban is not even sparing children. In fact, we can tell you, is so dangerous that India has decided to shut all of its consulates in Afghanistan. Today, New Delhi evacuated its staff from the consulate in Mazar-e-Sharif. This was the last functioning Indian mission outside Kabul. India has 4 consulates and 1 embassy in Afghanistan. All 4 consulates are now shut. Only the Indian embassy in Kabul remains open. A special flight was arranged to bring back Indian diplomats and security officials this evening. Indian citizens who happened to be in Mazar-e-Sharif and wanted to leave, were advised to leave, were also accommodated on the special flight. Why was this necessary? Because the Taliban have surrounded the city. Our correspondent Anas Malik has been reporting from the heart of action all day today. He's in Mazar-e-Sharif, where the Taliban could launch an offensive any moment now. Earlier today, he sent us this dispatch.
I'm standing outside the Indian consulate in Mazar-e-Sharif. The Indian side has asked its citizens to voluntarily evacuate the city. There would be a special flight that would be leaving from Mazar-e-Sharif for India tonight. And they've asked the Indian citizens to get onto that flight because the condition of the city is not at how it used to be. Mazar-e-Sharif was used to be considered as one of the most safest cities in the entire country after Bamiyan, but since yesterday we've seen a renewed offensive being launched as well by the Afghan Taliban, and the Taliban are, it won't be wrong to say that the Taliban are at the gates of Mazar-Sharif. They have been resisted, they have been pushed back by the militia and by the Afghan National Army. There was a fighting that was outgoing in the outskirts of the city as well. Anas Malik in Mazar, Afghanistan for WION World is One.
This is a major turning point, not just for Afghanistan, but also for India. When India was expanding its developmental efforts in Afghanistan, it opened consulates in Kandahar, Jalalabad, Herat and Mazar-e-Sharif. All 4 consulates are now shut. The shutdown, we are told, is temporary. But for New Delhi, all its development initiatives in these areas have come to a grinding halt. The way things are going, an all-out civilian war in Afghanistan looks inevitable. Reports say Afghan President Ashraf Ghani now wants to arm both civilians and warlords against the Taliban. Frankly, the Afghan government is running out of options here. President Ghani believes that peace talks with the Taliban are now dead. So he's looking to mobilize and arm locals to fight the Taliban. Earlier today, we received 3 videos. They're being circulated by pro-Taliban groups. The first one shows the Taliban in possession of new military equipment. This includes a military Humvee, much like the ones that the Americans used. Another video shows the Taliban with a tank. Since they began their offensive in the month of May, the Taliban, we know, has been seizing weapons and arms from the Afghan troops. So this could very well be an Afghan/American military tank now in possession of the Taliban. But guess what the terrorists claim? They say they made their own rockets. Honestly, it's very hard to believe. Also, it's not clear if these rockets work at all. This is basically textbook propaganda. The Taliban know how to instill fear, and they're succeeding. Here's an example. The Taliban have been targeting Afghan Air Force pilots. These pilots have been trained by the Americans to fly sophisticated machines, like the Black Hawk choppers. The Afghan Air Force is critical to Afghanistan's defense against the Taliban. So what do the Taliban do? Targeted killings. They're eliminating Afghan pilots. At least 8 of them have been killed in recent days, and the rest fear for their life. One report says 19 pilots have left the Afghan military. They fear that they will be assassinated. Well, these are the soldiers that the Americans trained to protect Afghanistan. They're deserting the battlefield, just like their trainers. The Americans are watching this mess, a mess of their own making, and refusing to take responsibility for the way things have turned out. Washington says it is, quote-unquote, up to the Afghan security forces to defend the country. Team Biden is living in denial. The U.S. Department of Defense was asked about Afghanistan. Do you know what they said? Afghan forces, they said, are capable of defending themselves.
The Taliban doesn't. They have modern weaponry and organizational skills. The Taliban doesn't. They have superior numbers to the Taliban. And so, again, they have the advantages. And it's really now their time to use those advantages.
What advantages? Either the Americans are blind, or they want to play blind and think that the rest of the world is dumb. Afghanistan is imploding. The Taliban that the Americans legitimized are on a killing spree. The soldiers that the Americans trained are fleeing, and the country that the Americans turned into a war laboratory is descending into a civil war. And the US says it is up to Afghanistan's neighbors to invest in peace. Well, the focus for the moment is on one neighbor, the one that practices terrorism as state policy, the one that supports the Taliban. And that neighbor, we all know, is Pakistan. Afghanistan's foreign minister has said this on record, so has the country's vice president. What was left, perhaps, was for the people of Afghanistan to say it in so many words. Well, now they are. Scores of Afghans are calling out Islamabad for waging a proxy war on their country and orchestrating the Taliban's actions. They also have a 2-word message for the world: sanction Pakistan. Here's a report.
Over the weekend, the Taliban captured 6 provincial capitals as they expanded their footprint in Afghanistan. A social media campaign was gaining strength on Twitter. Scores of Afghans demanded sanctions against Pakistan for facilitating and enabling the Taliban. Hashtag Sanction Pakistan was a top trend on Monday. By Tuesday, the campaign got even bigger. There were over 3 lakh tweets calling out Islamabad for orchestrating terror on Afghan soil. Some called it Pakistan's forever war, which will see no permanent ceasefire unless sanctions are imposed. Some others said Pakistan had crossed all boundaries by abducting and torturing the families of Afghan diplomats. Their campaign did not go unnoticed. Soon, international voices joined in, like Canadian diplomat Chris Alexander, who said that this campaign isn't just a hashtag on Twitter, but reflects the determination of Afghans to live in peace, free from invasion, proxy war, and terror. Miles away in Sweden, Afghan expats hit the streets, urging the UN to impose sanctions on Islamabad. The question is, will the United Nations act? Time and again, Islamabad has proven to be soliciting funds for the Taliban, bankrolling Taliban operations, arranging training for Taliban fighters, recruiting skilled manpower to serve in Taliban armies, planning and directing Taliban offensives, facilitating shipments of ammunition, providing direct combat support, and arranging diplomatic support. Yet, the UN has not acted. What is Pakistan's role in the current crisis? In May, there were reports of a surge in Taliban fundraising in Pakistan. Its supporters in Balochistan were sending thousands of rupees to finance Taliban operations. Soon, Pakistan's deep state began sending terrorists to join forces with the Taliban. Terrorists from Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed were hired as advisors and commanders by the Taliban in June. By July, pro-Taliban rallies were being held in Peshawar. At one such rally, flags of the Islamic Emirate were unfurled. Then, the vice president of Afghanistan revealed how Taliban's operations were being controlled from the cantonments of Quetta and Peshawar. He then went on record to say that the Pakistan Air Force is providing air support to the Taliban in certain areas. These claims were backed by Pakistani lawmakers in their parliament.
कि हमारी रियासत को इतने ही ये लोग पसंद हैं, तो ये हमारी अपनी रियासत पे उनके हवाले क्यों नहीं करते?
Now, the people of Afghanistan have spoken. They're urging global bodies to sanction Pakistan for harvesting chaos in their country. Turning a blind eye to their appeals now will be the same as being complicit in the Taliban's treachery. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
It's been 202 days since Joe Biden became the U.S. president. 202 days. In this time, he has held summits, he has traveled to Europe, he has played golf, he has test-driven electric pickup trucks. But he just can't make time for one errand: to call the Prime Minister of Pakistan. That's right, 6 months and still no call from the White House. I have to say, this is a very Imran Khan problem to have. Because Biden calls everyone. He even met his biggest rival, Vladimir Putin. But Imran Khan finds himself on Biden's block list. Is this a coincidence or a planned snub? Let me tell you this, there is nothing called coincidence in diplomacy. Imran Khan's phone is not ringing because Joe Biden doesn't want to talk. He's taking the measure of Pakistan and he doesn't like what he's seeing. First, some historical context. Joe Biden has served on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He then served as the U.S. Vice President, and both times he had a front row seat to Pakistan's deceit. Do you remember this picture from the Osama bin Laden raid? That's Joe Biden on the far left. He was watching live as U.S. Marines found and killed Osama bin Laden on Pakistani soil. And that was a turning point in Washington. America realized yet again that Pakistan cannot be trusted. Joe Biden is continuing that policy. He has ordered an internal review of U.S. Pakistan relations. And until that report is out, Imran Khan may not get the call. It's an outright snub. One that has hurt Pakistan's pride, or whatever was left of it. Their national security advisor is out complaining. And this is what he said: if a phone call is a concession, if a security relationship is a concession, Pakistan has options. Well, he sounds more like a wounded teenager, betrayed and ignored by the popular kids. But instead of complaining, Pakistan would do well to introspect, think about why America is ignoring reason. The US and Pakistan have nothing in common. Their relationship is purely. Joe Biden wants Pakistan's help in Afghanistan. He put them on the Afghan security quad. What did Islamabad give in return? Pakistani officials publicly defending the Taliban's atrocities. That was strike one. Strike two is Pakistan's iron brother, America's biggest rival at the moment, China. Pakistan says it is more than a military checkpost, that it can trade and combat climate change. But the US is not buying it. What they see is a Chinese colony. Chinese bridges, Chinese highways, and Chinese debt. So Pakistan's pitch for a broader relationship with the Americans is not going to work. And we've already seen evidence of this. Earlier this year, Joe Biden hosted a climate summit. 40 world leaders attended, 40, including Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. Guess who wasn't invited? Imran Khan. Here's another example. U.S. climate envoy John Kerry visited South Asia in April. He made stops in India and Bangladesh. Guess where he did not stop? Pakistan. You can't deny the trend. America looks at Pakistan through the security lens, and what do they see? A so-called partner that supports terrorists. Successive U.S. administrations have made the mistake of trusting Pakistan. In 2004, George Bush declared Islamabad a major non-NATO ally. They needed Pakistan's help to beat the Taliban. What was the result? Pakistan kept Taliban terrorists alive. They provided them safe havens on their soil. Joe Biden is keen to not repeat that mistake. He wants to keep Pakistan at arm's length. The flip side is this. Biden is pushing Pakistan closer to China, which means one step closer to a debt trap. So Washington perhaps wouldn't mind that. You cannot double-cross an ally, protect and cheer their enemy, and then expect a Zoom call in the morning. That's not how diplomacy works. That's not how partnerships work. Of course, it is fate plus comical timing that Imran Khan is yet again front and center. His name lends seamlessly to such disasters. The Prime Minister is being trolled on Pakistani social media. They're pushing a new hashtag, Biden Mujhe Call Karo. Basically means Biden call me. And leading the takedown rather, was political activist Reham Khan, who also happens to be Imran Khan's ex-wife. She posted this comic strip on Twitter along with the lyrics of a Bollywood song. Here's another one. This time, Imran Khan is atop a telephone line, desperately trying to connect with Biden. All of this sounds funny and trivial, but in the world of geopolitics, one phone call means a lot. It is the difference between an embrace and a snub, an ally and a rival. And for Pakistan, this snub has been years in the making. All the double games and betrayals have cost them the biggest asset in diplomacy, trust. Today, Canada has decided to extend the flight ban from India. Why? Virus concerns, they say. Well, what about the US, where cases are mounting? No restrictions there. Americans can travel to Canada. All they need is a proof of vaccination. But no such option has been given to Indians. Again, why? Public health concerns, says Canada. How is it that the same rules do not apply to the US? Why are countries like Canada using arbitrary rules to stop travel from certain pockets? Does it have to do with public health policy, or is it politics?
The year is 2019. A survey finds 2/3 of Australians are against immigration. The government of Scott Morrison quickly acts to cut permanent migration by 30,000.
For the stolen generations.
In 2020 comes the pandemic. Governments across the world suffer a fall in popularity. Morrison wants to be an exception, so in April 2021, he decides to whip up nationalism. Morrison bans travel from India, also announces strict penalties, $5,000 and 5 years in jail. No exception is made for citizens returning home from India. FYI, migrants make up 30% of all Australians, and Indian-born Australians are the second largest group. So was the ban political? Precautionary, says Australia, as it justifies the arbitrary policy. A month later, here's what a conservative newspaper finds. Scott Morrison won. Families looking to reunite, 0. Welcome to 2021. A year after the virus from Wuhan came in between families, the world is now conspiring to keep them apart. Travel has become a challenge. Passports can no longer take you to your loved ones. Neither can a proof of vaccination. Why? Because politicians are playing their best politics, and businesses are making money off people's misery. None of this seems to be making sense, much like this headline. Canada has extended a ban on direct flights from India. The ban was first put in place in April. It was rolled over several times, was set to expire on August the 21st, but it has been extended for the 5th time. The ban on travel from India now remains until September 21. But Americans, they're seeing a virus surge, but they can still enter Canada. All they need to do is show proof of vaccination. For Indians, that's not even an option. Politics. Public Health says Canada's Transport Department, weirdly enough, public health is not a concern with dealing with travellers from America. Public health was not a concern for Australia when the US and the UK suffered devastating waves. Flights from the West were always welcome. Flights from countries with darker-skinned people, not so much. This is the ugly truth of the pandemic. The health crisis has become a tool in the hand of politicians who are making it harder for people to move around. They are clinging onto strict border controls, even as daily cases dip in countries around the world. Indonesia, for example, has more deadly cases than India, but it will not let Indians land in the country. Neither will Iran, Kuwait, Singapore, New Zealand, Bahrain, Oman, Italy or Djibouti. What about people who have families in these countries? What will migrant workers do who are stuck jobless in countries around the world? The pandemic is 16 months old. Some families have been separated for much longer. Shouldn't they get a chance to see their loved ones? Shouldn't workers be allowed to return home? Businesses, it seems, do not want to let that happen. A day after the UK reopened travel from India, the fares of Delhi-London flights shot through the roof. Economy seats were being sold for 3.95 lakh rupees. The cheapest seat was 1.2 lakh rupees. Imagine the cost of such fares on families, on students looking to finally travel to campuses. Why are we making the pandemic harder for the world? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
They say trading together creates a partnership. But fighting together creates a brotherhood. I'm not trying to romanticize war here, but bonds made in the battlefield often last longer. And during peacetime, this means defense cooperation like war games, joint drills, joint research. Why am I talking about this? Because India has struck a new defense partnership, frankly an unlikely one. On Monday, Indian warship INS Kochi arrived in Saudi Arabia. It is taking part in the first ever naval exercise between the two nations. The drills are called Al-Mohed Al-Hind 2021. They were off to a great start. At the Jubail port, the Indian warship was welcomed by the Royal Saudi Naval Forces, the border guards and officials of the Indian embassy. The exercise includes a number of maneuvers, both shore and sea-based. It is not a grand war game with massive armadas. It's a quiet start, possibly how both sides wanted it. India's relations with Saudi Arabia were pinned on energy, you see. Riyadh produced oil, India needed oil, pretty straightforward there. But the oil tap will soon run out, and Saudi Arabia is planning for its future, for this future, a future without oil barrels. It is part of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030. He wants to diversify the economy, invest in smart cities and build green energy plants. Basically, a complete revamp. Where does that leave India? With a lot of opportunities. Indian investors are pumping money into Saudi Arabia. In 2019, the Saudi envoy called India a strategic partner of Vision 2030. We're talking about a hybrid relationship here. India can help Saudi Arabia in public services, skill development, job creation. Saudi oil giants can find new frontiers in India, especially when the oil tap dries back home. A big part of this hybrid relationship is defense. In December last year, India's Army Chief General M.M. Naravne visited Riyadh. He met with top Saudi generals. The discussion was all about expanding defense ties. And this military drill is the result. Let me tell you a bit more about INS Kochi, the ship that India has deployed to West Asia. It was built by Indian engineers with Indian technology. It's a Kolkata-class stealth-guided missile destroyer, a flagship of the Navy. Its primary mission is the joint drill, but a bit of show-off never hurts. You see, Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest arms buyers in the world. They consistently top the list, so India wants to showcase its shipbuilding skills, possibly tap the Saudi Arabian market in the process. That's the bilateral interest for India. What about the larger picture? Yesterday, India unveiled a maritime roadmap at the United Nations Security Council. How does this voyage fit in? To answer this, we must look at INS Kochi's journey. Its first stop was the UAE, United Arab Emirates, where Indian and Emirati navies conducted a joint drill. India deployed INS Kochi and 2 Sea King helicopters. The UAE deployed a guided missile corvette. Remember, these are troubled waters. Just last week, an Israeli ship was attacked by drones. Most of the evidence points to Iran. This is the backdrop of India's voyage, a boiling Persian Gulf and a shadow war that is spiraling out of control. This is the situation at the moment. It tells you India wasn't joking about maritime responsibility yesterday. Think about it. New Delhi has good relations with Israel, Iran and Saudi Arabia, probably the only country that can say so. And these relations are dehyphenated. India has refused to take sides in the West Asian conflicts. It's all about securing trade routes, upholding maritime laws. And this gives New Delhi wiggle room in bilateral ties, like the partnership with Saudi Arabia. You could say it was the final step in a constantly maturing relationship. This journey has seen multiple recalibrations, especially from Saudi Arabia. For decades, the kingdom's #1 partner in South Asia was Pakistan. They exchanged troops, they traded weapons. It was a broad military cooperation. And it continued as recently as 2017. Pakistan's then Army Chief Rahil Sharif was appointed to lead an Islamic anti-terror coalition. This group had 39 nations. It was headquartered in Saudi Arabia. All seemed well between Islamabad and Riyadh. In 2019, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman offered his private jet to Imran Khan. He said his guest cannot leave on a commercial flight. Imran Khan was headed to New York for the UN General Assembly. You may remember his hysterical performance there. Turns out, even MBS was not impressed. While returning from the UN, the Crown Prince ordered his plane back to New York. Imran Khan ended up flying commercial after all. Things went downhill from there. Saudi Arabia forced Pakistan to repay $1 billion, a loan, a $1 billion loan. It recognized India's rights to make decisions on Kashmir. It joined New Delhi in condemning global terrorism. The new Saudi Arabia was looking for reliable and trustworthy partners that led them from Pakistan to India. As I said at the start, fighting together builds a brotherhood. You need trust to combine your militaries, trust that goes beyond selling and buying barrels of oil. The India-Saudi Arabia relationship has reached that stage. The goal is to push on from here. Let's look at what's happening in China. Months after it declared victory over the pandemic, millions of Chinese citizens are being tested again. The Delta variant is spreading across the country. This is being called the worst outbreak since Wuhan. Beijing blames local officials for this. It has even punished 40 of them. But once again, China is trying to hide its own failures through a crackdown. So what is Beijing hiding this time? Our next report has the answers.
Last year, China declared victory over the pandemic with a pool party in Wuhan. They celebrated too soon, because now all of Wuhan is taking tests for that homegrown virus. The Delta variant has breached China's borders. The virus is spreading fast. The Chinese press says this is the worst outbreak since Wuhan. Cities reported a fresh outbreak. More than 100 new infections. China has reported more than 1,000 new cases. And these are the official figures. A sack of salt. This surge is despite China's vaccination record. It claims to have administered doses across the mainland. China's story just doesn't. As always, the Communist Party is blaming everyone. At least 47 officials have been accused of negligence. This includes heads of local governments, members of health commissions, targets to blame for this outbreak, but the problem lies elsewhere. China was hoping that its homemade shots would permanently defeat its homemade virus. That's not happening. Sinovac and Sinopharm are under scrutiny. They are the backbone of China's vaccination strategy. Those who took these shots are falling sick. Shanghai Airport. Some breakthrough infections were reported there. As always, China is not being transparent with data. Beijing is yet to share any clear information about the breakthrough infections. Nor has it shared any data about the efficacy of the Chinese jabs against the Delta variant. There is growing evidence that Chinese jabs are failing. Other countries that relied on Chinese vaccines are resorting to boosters. The UAE and Turkey, for example, and also Mongolia. In Indonesia, health workers who took the jab from Sinovac are being given a booster from Moderna. This was after hundreds of doctors were infected by the Wuhan virus recently, after the current stocks run out. The Philippines and Thailand are considering the rapidly spreading in its home country. The Delta variant has cut short Xi Jinping's victory lap. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
I've said belt and roadblocks, more like. In the last few months, we've seen various B.R.I. projects getting cancelled and numerous reports of rampant corruption. Now, a B.R.I. project in Cambodia has been declared a human rights disaster, one that has upended thousands of lives. We're talking about the Lower Sisantu Dam in northeastern Cambodia. The map on your screen shows you where it's located. This hydroelectric project is situated along a tributary of the Mekong River, which is said to be the lifeline of Cambodia. As for the project, it is said to be one of Asia's widest dams. It was built at a cost of $816 million, constructed jointly by China and Cambodia, and was officially launched in December 2018. Since then, there have been numerous concerns on how this dam would inundate several villages and lead to the displacement of local villagers. Now, a Human Rights Watch report has proven that this dam has already upended thousands of lives. The report says that this Chinese project has hurt the lives and livelihoods of indigenous and ethnic minorities living in this area. It's a 137-page report. It documents the economic, social and environmental violations as a result of this project. Let me list out the most significant findings. This is what it says, that Chinese officials and Cambodian authorities consulted with these communities before the project began, but they ignored all the concerns expressed. It says that they made no attempt to obtain prior and informed consent for the project, as is specified in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. In fact, from 2011 to 2018, the indigenous communities protested and wrote numerous letters listing their concerns, but all their complaints were dismissed. Those who objected were threatened and jailed. And the result is this: nearly 5,000 people have been displaced since this project was launched. This includes people whose families had lived in the area for generations. The project has also destroyed their livelihoods. The locals relied mostly on fishing income. But ever since the project began, there has been a steep decline in fishery yields, to the extent that there aren't even enough fish to eat now. The displaced villagers say their agricultural yields have also decreased. The lands they have been relocated to are less fertile, with little to grow, and the government provides no compensation for the loss of income. China Huaneng Group, the enterprise behind this project, has not set up any effective grievance mechanism to resolve these disputes or complaints. The villagers have been left to fend for themselves. The impact is as much economical as it is environmental. The report says that several studies have shown that decomposing vegetative matter has been submerged by the dam's reservoirs and is leading to emissions of greenhouse gases that rival the emissions by ordinary fossil fuel plants. And if this wasn't enough, there's also proof of distortion and fabrication of facts. The report says that China's China Huaneng has repeatedly claimed that this dam can produce at least 1,998 gigawatt hours of electricity per year, which is about 1/6 of Cambodia's entire annual power production. But according to the project's tax revenues estimates accessed by investigators, the dam's actual production is less than half of what Chinese officials claim. Simply put, this is yet another classic BRI project. Absolutely no regard on the impact it will have on people. For the impact it will have on people, no regard whatsoever for the environmental damage being caused, and no proof of how the project is beneficial to Cambodians. What's quite evident, though, is China's appetite for more land, more money and more overseas influence, even if it comes at the cost of ruining thousands of lives. And now it's time for your daily reminder on the impending apocalypse. I'm sorry if it sounds scary, but that's the intention. The gentle reminders have not worked, you see. Half-hearted summits have not worked. Maybe scary warnings will. And this one is pretty straightforward. Our seas are rising, our islands are sinking, and pretty soon entire countries will be extinct. It does not get scarier than this. For most of the world, yesterday's climate report was a warning. Act now or prepare for the worst. But for small island nations, it was a death knell. It may already be too late to help them. The climate report said we can stop global warming by halting emissions, but experts say sea levels would still rise because climate change is not a switch. Results will take years, if not decades. So island nations across the world are clubbing together and appealing for urgent action. They're represented by the Alliance of Small Island States. There are 39 members, including Singapore, Seychelles, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Cuba, the Bahamas. These nations are spread all over the planet, and they're on the front lines of climate change. I'll give you the example of Kiribati, a tiny nation in the Pacific. It is made up of 3 archipelagos. The tallest one is just 6 feet over the sea, over sea level. If the water rises by 3 feet, 2/3 of Kiribati could be submerged. For these people, climate change is not a conspiracy theory. They see it every day in supercharged floods and hybrid cyclones. So it's time to stop putting a to-do stamp on climate change because the dangers are imminent, not in some distant future. The United Nations estimates that temperatures will rise 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 2 decades. At this rate, seas will rise by 0.5 meter in this century. I'm talking about a modest scenario. What if things get worse? Then sea levels could rise by up to 2 meters at the end of this century. That's more than 6 feet. Do you know what that means? The whole of Kiribati could disappear in this century. Same for the Maldives. All of its coral islands are below 6 feet elevation. They could all disappear in this century. We're talking about millions of people displaced. A new generation of climate refugees. Who will take them in? Who will give them jobs and feed them? The fact is, climate change is more expensive than climate action. And to prove this, let's shift from the creeping seas to the raging inferno, the wildfires in Europe. They've charred the earth, uprooted thousands of residents, laid waste to settlements. Look at some of these pictures. If they don't scream apocalypse, nothing will. What about the receipt for this disaster? We don't have the full picture yet, but the Greek Prime Minister has announced a compensation package, 500 million euros, $587 million. That's the bill of climate change. We, the people, are paying this bill. But what about the politicians who ignored the threat, the leaders who denied climate change and patronized factories? Well, some of them are apologizing, like the Prime Minister of Greece. He says climate change is a reason, but not an excuse.
The extent of the destruction, especially in Evia and in Attica, blackens all of our hearts, and I'm the first to apologize for whatever weaknesses existed. I completely understand the pain of our citizens who saw their houses and property burning, the upheaval of having to abruptly leave their homes.
A sorry means little when a country is burning. Nonetheless, it's a start. If politicians are responsible for crime, for national security, for economic growth, then why not climate change? Give it some thought the next time you vote. And also remember these pictures the next time you vote. The pictures on your screen. This is smoke rising from the fires in Siberia. Do you know where this picture was clicked? The North Pole. For the first time ever, there is smoke engulfing the North Pole, a true hallmark of human progress. Siberia is supposed to be one of the coldest places on Earth. This is what it looks like now. 3.4 million hectares are still burning. Most of it is too remote for firefighters to access. For once, it makes sense to play the blame game. Take the Pacific Islands, for instance. They're not carbon monsters. They don't have factory chains and coal plants. But guess who does? Australia. Rich, powerful countries burn coal. Poor coastal nations bear the brunt. Last week, Prime Minister Scott Morrison met with the Pacific nations. He promised to support these small countries, but that doesn't change the past. For years, Prime Minister Morrison denied climate change. His appetite for coal sunk the Pacific Islands. And even now, he's refusing to budge. The Australian PM says he will not sign a blank check to control climate change. He has rejected the target of net zero emissions. And we wonder why climate change is uncontrollable. The politics has made matters worse. We spent time debating when we should have been acting. We spent time spinning conspiracies when we should have been setting targets. These wildfires are a testimony to that negligence. In this case, Nero was indeed fiddling when Rome burned.